Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz, one of the most influential and controversial political figures of the 20th century, was the leader of Cuba for nearly 5 decades. His life was marked by his revolutionary ideals, his defiance of U.S. influence, and his efforts to shape Cuba into a socialist state. From a young lawyer fighting against dictatorship to a revolutionary who changed the course of Cuban history, Fidel Castro remains an enduring symbol of resistance, independence, and political transformation. Early life and education. Fidel Castro was born on August 13, 1926, in Biran, a small town in the Holguin province of eastern Cuba. He was the third of 7 children born to Angel Castro, a wealthy Spanish sugarcane farmer, and Lina Ruz Gonzalez, a household servant who later became his father's second wife. Despite his rural upbringing, Fidel's father ensured that his children received a good education. Castro attended several Jesuit schools, including the prestigious Colegio de Belén in Havana. He was known as an intelligent, disciplined, and rebellious student with a deep sense of justice and nationalism. After finishing school, he enrolled at the University of Havana to study law in 1945. During his university years, Castro became deeply involved in political activism. He joined protests against government corruption and U.S. domination of Cuban affairs, shaping his early revolutionary ideas. Political awakening and the path to revolution. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Cuba was under the rule of President Carlos Prio Socarrás, and the country was rife with corruption and inequality. Fidel Castro initially entered politics through the Orthodox Party, led by Eduardo Chibas, which aimed to end corruption and restore national pride. However, the assassination of Chibas and the 1952 coup by Fulgencio Batista, who overthrew the government and established a military dictatorship, pushed Castro toward a more radical path. Outraged by Batista's actions, Castro filed a legal complaint against the dictator for violating the constitution, but his case was dismissed. Determined to take action, he began organizing a movement to overthrow Batista by force. The 26th of July movement and the Cuban Revolution. On July 26, 1953, Castro led about 160 young revolutionaries in an attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. The assault failed, many were killed, and Castro was captured and sentenced to 15 years in prison. During his trial, he delivered his famous speech "History Will Absolve Me," outlining his vision for Cuba's future land reform, education, healthcare, and justice for the poor. After serving less than 2 years, Castro was released in 1955 under a general amnesty. He went into exile in Mexico, where he reorganized his revolutionary group and met Ernesto Che Guevara, who became a key ally. Together, they formed the 26th of July movement, named after the failed Moncada attack. In December 1956, Castro, Guevara, and 80 other fighters sailed to Cuba aboard a small yacht called Granma. The landing was disastrous, most were killed or captured, but Castro and a handful of survivors escaped to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. There, they launched a guerrilla campaign against Batista's forces. Over 2 years, their movement grew stronger, gaining popular support from peasants, students, and workers. On January 1, 1959, Batista fled Cuba, and Fidel Castro triumphantly entered Havana, marking the victory of the Cuban Revolution. Establishing a socialist state. After taking power, Castro moved quickly to transform Cuba. He nationalized industries, redistributed land, and launched massive literacy and healthcare campaigns. These reforms dramatically improved living standards for many Cubans but also led to conflicts with wealthy elites and foreign companies, especially those from the United States. In 1960, the U.S. imposed an economic embargo on Cuba, and relations between the two nations deteriorated rapidly. In response, Castro aligned Cuba with the Soviet Union, officially declaring the country a socialist state in 1961. That same year, the U.S.-backed Bay of Pigs invasion attempted to overthrow Castro's government, but the plan failed, solidifying his power and increasing his popularity among supporters. The Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba's alliance with the Soviet Union placed it at the center of Cold War tensions. In 1962, the world faced one of its most dangerous moments: the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, leading to a standoff with the United States. For 13 tense days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. Ultimately, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for the US promising not to invade Cuba and secretly removing its missiles from Turkey. Despite the crisis, Castro's position as Cuba's leader remained firm. He continued to promote socialist policies and support revolutionary movements in Latin America, Africa, and beyond. Domestic policies and international influence. Under Castro's rule, Cuba became known for its high literacy rate, universal healthcare, and free education. However, his government also faced criticism for restricting freedom of speech, jailing political opponents, and maintaining strict state control over daily life. Internationally, Castro became a symbol of anti-imperialism and Third World solidarity. He played an active role in the non-aligned movement and sent Cuban troops to support revolutionary movements, most notably in Angola and Ethiopia. Later years and retirement. By the 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba faced a severe economic crisis known as the Special Period. The loss of Soviet aid led to shortages of food, fuel, and basic goods. Despite the hardships, Castro managed to maintain power and slowly introduced limited economic reforms. In 2006, due to declining health, Fidel Castro temporarily transferred power to his brother Raúl Castro. 2 years later, he officially resigned as president, ending his nearly 50-year rule. Even in retirement, he continued to write essays and commentaries on world affairs, remaining a respected figure among his followers. Death and legacy. Fidel Castro passed away on November 25, 2016, at the age of 90. His death marked the end of an era in Cuban and global politics. For many, he was a heroic leader who stood up to imperialism and improved the lives of ordinary Cubans. For others, he was a dictator who ruled through fear and repression. Regardless of one's perspective, Fidel Castro's impact on world history is undeniable. He transformed Cuba into the first socialist state in the Western Hemisphere, defied U.S. dominance for decades, and inspired revolutionary movements worldwide. His complex legacy continues to influence debates on freedom, equality, and the meaning of true independence.